Hi, and welcome to the first of the three-part landscape demo series. I'm going to be putting on my Bob Ross hat here, and I'm gonna get started with with the background. That's the first of the three parts. The second being the middle ground, the third being the foreground. And I'm actually going to be a little different from Bob Ross, in that I'm not going to be going over specific formulaic techniques here for you to copy, but instead I'm going to go over strategies and global ideas I think that are going to allow you to do what you want to do with some ideas in mind and how to make it happen better and easier. So, to start, of course, I'm working with a variety of blues in the background. I have a great reference to look at from the Hudson River School, a Thomas Cole Sky that I'm going to use. And I'm getting darker on the corners, and I got my light source. I'm beginning to block in some clouds simply with lights and some middle tones. I'm really going to hold off on starting to use any of those dark values. I'm going to introduce those as we move forward in space. That's a key concept here. So now that I've been really careful about not adding too much dark here into the far background sky, I'm coming much forward in space now, and I've made this sort of dirty bluish brown, and I love this go-to color usage for me is adding a blue, it could be a cobalt, ultramarine, um, with a burnt sienna or a burnt umber brown, just like an earth tone, and the mixture of those two really makes it sort of neutral color that's either more cool or more warm. In this case, though, I've added less white. I've done that a little bit in the background, in those sort of lavenders of the clouds, where I also added some alizarin crimson. But in this case, I just sticking to the blue and brown, and then added some white to get that darker middle tone that I can control. And then it might feel strange, but adding that over the top of these things in the back sort of pushes them forward in space and really pushes those lighter clouds that don't have any of those darks in them into the background. It does feel perhaps a little bit strange doing so, and it's true that if you make a significant mistake, you kind of have to remove the paint both on top and below that smudge of dark cloud. But it's not such a big deal. I haven't really invested significant amounts of time on that background sky anyway. And besides, how badly can you mess up here, really? These clouds are not, any kind of precise form or something that I need to follow. And then after getting those sort of like middle darky tones that pop forward in space, then I work my way towards these warmer lights here and then the brighter lights that are, the highlights from the light source, the sun. And I'm sort of softening the transition then from that middle dark to the lights. And that little bit of contrast there is really what's going to pop these clouds forward in space and begin to make that sense of distance that we're looking for. And that's really key in landscape painting, is trying to create that illusionistic three-dimensional space. background sky, one thing that I did, in addition to not using darks, was to use very much lights. I really save the brightest lights for what's going to be the brightest parts of the picture plane, which is going to be the light source, the sun, and the area around the sun. So I find that the drama of light is amplified by trying to reserve it for the places where you really want that brilliance. You really want to try to resist the brightest lights, so that you can get that drama in the sun and the areas around it. After having done that, I continually will knock it back and I'll keep working in the lights into that background. This horizon area is kind of a fun spot. And the main thing here is to just make sure that your horizon, if you're seeing a long distance away, is not going to be very different in hue and value than the sky above it, because you really want them to be at this point where they almost begin to blend in together. So to do so, just make sure that there is some changes in hue and value. Of course, you can have a little bit more darks in the land than you will in the sky, and you're also going to have a little change in saturation, just a little, beginning to slightly increase the amount of saturation in the colors that you're using. And then as we move forward after that horizon in space, we can begin to introduce some slightly more darks and more saturation, etc., as you'll see me doing here. Now that I'm working on the ground, the land, I would say it's still a background, but it's different from the sky. I've switched up my reference source. I'm working on a painting called A View in the Adirondacks, from 1957 by William Trost Richards, and I think this really works for me, this switching sources around. So I'm not really just copying stuff, but instead I'm sort of making a Frankenstein painting with all these different sorts of references. The one thing to keep in mind is having the light source be somewhat similar, but you can really play around with this. You can go from, something like I'm using Hudson River School reference to something from some sort of science fiction magazine if you'd like, or your own photos, even better. And as I'm working here forward in space, you can see I'm continuing to use more saturation, more darks, and more lights, because that kind of contrast is going to push each layer back and push each layer forward. I do, you'll notice, put in more contrast, more saturation, more texture. Those are the elements, saturation, contrast, and texture, that are going to move the elements forward or backwards with less of them. But each one gets knocked down. So I put it in and I'll blend. So there's always this really important blending that goes on. Sometimes you get too attached to all these little details that you're putting in there. But those details, if they're too strong, then it just makes everything sort of become busy, and you lose the sense of what really is important when everything's important. best things that you can do to make this kind of painting successful is to take it easy. And by that, I mean not only to relax and listen to good music, which is, of course, super helpful, but also to not use a whole lot of paint. Really, less paint makes it easier. You don't need cool, fancy brush strokes. You don't need cool, fancy brushes that do like backflips. And we don't need to have really bright colors. And we don't need to have even the coolest imagery. We don't need to have volcanoes and giant suns over the ocean with palm trees and I don't know, all kinds of other things that, are going to make something quick and cool happen. Take your time and let it come slowly. Let each thing build off another. Go back in and actually tone down things, make them softer.